Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our interview with Roger Hendrix. This is part 7. I believe we're in the 9th hour or so of our interview. We may break a record here, but I'm not anywhere tired or ready to end. We're right smack dab in the middle of Roger's faith journey. We spoke about that in the previous, in episode 6, and now we're going to talk about it more. So, Roger, last we left off, the church's involvement in Proposition 8, and then your daughter's coming to you and asking you about polygamy, let's just say around, 2015-ish, 2016, something like that, were really important moments for you as you started to engage. And I think what you referred to is this Hegelian dialectic, where you're trying to engage in a more deep and sophisticated and informed conversation internally in your own brain about how you reconciled Mormonism and church history and the church's civil rights record, etc. So maybe let's talk a bit about where you went from there as you're listening to Mormon Stories Podcast, as you're reading Rough Stone Rolling by Richard Bushman. Talk to us about your evolution on your opinions about Joseph Smith and then maybe Brigham Young.
Yeah. My opinions about Joseph Smith, that's been a long journey, and my conclusion is that without a doubt, the greatest religious leader in American history, and probably one of the 2 or 3 greatest religious leaders in world history. And my feeling is that there is no great religion without a great story. And Joseph Smith's story, his narrative, the myth, the story that he told, just can't be beat. And it forces you to ask yourself, if this thing is true, it encompasses everything that's ever happened in world history, and we should be a part of this movement, and we'll do anything to continue to be a part of this movement. I believe that the only religious story that I have heard that is greater than Joseph Smith's story was the Jesus story. When you have a person dying on the cross and resurrecting in 3 days and indicating that all of us can follow along with him, that's a hard story to beat. Muhammad didn't have a greater story. Buddha didn't have a greater story than that. Hinduism had many stories. But that's Jesus' story, I think, is cannot be beat in the annals of religious history. But I think Joseph's story follows along with that. And that's why you've had many hundreds of thousands of people following that story, because it's compelling. I also believe that Brigham Young kind of has to be put in that group. I believe that Brigham Young is probably the second greatest religious leader in American history, and at least would have to be in the top 10 in world history. And so the combination of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, the model that they created, impresses me. And I'm glad that I've been a part of that.
So I think this really hits a really critical issue in your story and in listener feedback, because so many people who listened to the first 7 hours came away, number one, feeling like you're a believer. And I just received a comment on mormonstories.org saying, and this is going to sound kind of harsh. This is a harsh word. I don't like it. I almost deleted the comment because I don't like it when people insult my guests. But somebody wrote, Roger's just a shill for the church. So people are thinking by now that you're somewhere between a believer or an apologist for the church. And that's not how I experience you in my interactions with you. So yes, Joseph's story is sort of a fantastic tale or story. Can you dig deeper about your personal faith in the religion and in the scriptural text that he produced, and how that jives with your own personal beliefs now and your opinions about his character?
Yeah. When I say that Joseph Smith's story there is no great religion without a great story, I use the term very specifically, story. I believe that what he told us, the narrative that he told us, was a story. I'm pretty sure that he never used the gold plates to translate. The testimony is of the witnesses saw him personally, said he looked into a hat, he put stones in a hat, and he received messages. Okay, now some of my friends believe that he saw the stuff from the gold plates and then translated that or told it to those who wrote it down. And I said it's just as easily could be that he just told the story. He created the story right there. Maybe picked up some documents along the way. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure a lot of that is a story that he created, just like the resurrection story evolved over a period of a century after the life of Jesus. And so that's why these stories are so compelling, because they're so big. And when you have a big story, you're going to have a big religion. And that's what I mean by that. And so, well, on further evidence about Joseph, I believe this guy grew up having great confidence. He was selling his wares as a treasure hunter when he was a very young boy, and he was selling it to adults. And so he knew what adults like to hear. He was a physical man, and he could take care of himself physically. He was robust. And so, he heard great stories from his family. And so he wasn't afraid of the run-of-the-mill guy. He was used to telling stories. He heard a lot of stories. There was a lot of storytelling going on in the community. And this guy, in his sphere, he had no peer. He was a genius. And one of my friends said, who's a very sophisticated lawyer here in this community, said, well, I couldn't make up all that stuff. And my response to him was, are you the greatest lawyer who has ever lived? No, he said. Well, Joseph was probably the greatest religious leader that ever lived. He was a genius. And so you can't understand through just our common way of understanding ideas about guys who are outside of the margin, who push life forward. And to do that, you have to go beyond the margins. You can't be afraid. You have to have a vivid imagination. And I believe that's what Joseph did. And then Brigham took those stories and created the Great Basin Kingdom. That's what I like the most about the church. It is my ancestors, your ancestors, we collectively created a new civilization, a Great Basin Kingdom, and that's what appeals to me more than anything else. That's in accordance with my personality and what I like doing, and maybe I'm repeating myself, what appeals to me psychologically and intellectually. So you're talking about two of the greatest religious leaders that we've probably ever seen. I liked what they did. Now, do I believe it happened just exactly the way Joseph says it happened, or people who followed him said it happened? No, because I believe it's a story, it's a narrative, and we're constantly refining that. Now, that's what I like. Now, where did I start coming up with that model? The book that has had the biggest impression on me, has had the biggest impact on me intellectually, has been Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. And this is one of the great sociological texts that I've ever read. And what he says is that all great mass movements, ideological movements, have three parts or three personalities. Number one, there's always got to be the guy with ideas and big ideas. And so the man of ideas, the person with ideas. Number two in the movement, you have to have what is called the true believer, the person who really believes the ideas of the first guy. And he's willing to do anything to make that work. And this true believer, he's a tough guy, and he has to do tough things, and he does tough things. And then the third kind of personality that comes on the scene is the practical man of means. They're neither the man of ideas nor are they the true believer, but they're the practical man of means who make the movement work on an everyday basis. And so a person with great ideas is not suited to be a practical man of means. And so our religious leaders in the church today, they're practical man of means. They're educated people. They know how to protect the church. They know how to market the church. They're educated to be able to solve the everyday problems of the church, but they ain't the guy with the big ideas. And they're not, quote, the sociological term for the true believer who's ready to knock heads and from a frontier create a civilization. That works for me. Now, where do I fit into that? Well, I'm a practical man of means. I came in, I knew how to organize because I became a management consultant. I knew how to teach because I was in CES. And so I knew how to move the church along from the ideas that Joseph Smith created to the kingdom that Brigham Young established. And so I knew how to solve problems. But I wasn't an idea guy like Joseph Smith, and I wasn't a Brigham Young, but I was the guys that come along and make it work on an everyday basis. Now, that means that there are some things that even the practical man of means, they disagree with on a practical basis. That's where I fit.
So as you are, navigating this journey, over the past few years, there's, this sort of, you have this sociological, philosophical lens that you've, processed Joseph Smith through, great storyteller, great leader, visionary. But let's just say there's three kind of ways that people who go deep on Joseph Smith turn out. They either kind of remain the true believer, or they become apologetic, where they, let's say they go the Bushman or the Givens or the Mason route, and we call those neo-apologetics these days because classic apologetics is kind of slowly disappearing. But they go very postmodern, and they start redefining what does the word translation really mean, and what does true really mean, and they get philosophical. But at their core, they're still beginning with the position of belief and then just reshaping or redefining words and concepts to then justify a continued belief. And then there's people that say anywhere from this doesn't work for me anymore, or I don't believe this anymore. And sometimes they go all the way to, well, Joseph Smith was a bad man. He was a charlatan. He was a fraud. He was sleeping with other men's wives. He was becoming a sexual predator with young girls. The Book of Mormon he was claiming it was a translation when it was really a forgery, and this is a bad man hurting people. Where have you come out in that spectrum or anywhere else along the continuum?
Yeah. Okay. If I've had any deep challenges with the church, I've come to the conclusion it's always on modern day social issues. Black in the priesthood, ERA, gay, the gay issue right now. And so it always seems like I'm coming out on the opposite side of how the church comes out on social issues. So I just say I do not agree, nor have I really ever agreed on the church's stance on those great social issues of our time. Now, some of those I had to tolerate for obvious reasons or practical reasons. On the gay issue, that doesn't seem to be healing itself right yet. And so they have forced a lot of us to make a decision and that's where I'm at right now with gays and the church, the issue of homosexuality. And so that's where I come out. Now, do I believe that Joseph Smith was a scoundrel? Do I believe he married other men's wives? Yeah, there was great leaders. They go beyond the margins, and the normal folk, they're not used to that, and these guys will press the issue because they're not afraid of the law. They're not afraid of people. They go where they want to go. And Joseph Smith went too far on certain issues. Now, do I believe he was inherently evil? No. Why? You can't get a mass movement like he has created along with Brigham Young and just say at the core these guys were evil, because people would reject it. People would know it who were with those guys at that particular time. But do I have conflict with the church right now on social issues? And the answer is yes.
So what I want to do is to keep kind of drilling down to get you to talk about your beliefs, particularly, the type of temple recommend questions. Is Joseph Smith, was he called as God's prophet by God? Was the Book of Mormon scripture translated through the gift and power of God? Is the current president of the church God's prophet on the earth? I really want to know where you stand in terms of belief. And before I put that out there, I'm trying to figure out if I'm sensing that you don't really want to go there, if you'd rather not go there.
Didn't I go there?
No, I don't think you have.
Can you just start asking me specific questions and I'll just tell you forthrightly what I believe.
Okay. So was Joseph Smith called of God as a prophet to restore the gospel on the earth?
I believe that Joseph Smith was created one of the greatest stories that have ever been created. And he said that he received the revelation from God, and that's part of his story and his narrative. Now, that gets into the issue of what is my belief about God? And I believe that man created God. Man has created the great stories about God. And I believe that man and woman, they've created stories about God because as humans we seem to really need God. And so we create what we need. And so I believe that Joseph Smith created a great story about God. And people liked it, they loved it, and they followed him.
So then going back to God, do you believe in an anthropomorphic Heavenly Father who's an exalted man who lives up on Kolob or wherever and is, managing the affairs of this mortal existence, and is the father of your spirit and the father of the human race spiritually, and the governor of this earth, and is someone that you pray to get guidance because you believe he's there and loves you and answers your prayers?
Okay, let me ask a humble question of you. From what I've said, what do you think my answer would be?
No.
Okay, there we go.
But you don't quite want to say it.
No, I don't believe that.
Okay. And so that Jesus was the Son of God and resurrected, is that a similar story, but not something you actually believe is true? Happened? That Jesus actually did rise from the dead as a resurrected being and atone for our sins as the Son of God kind of thing?
I believe it was the greatest story ever told. Do I believe it actually happened? No.
Okay. So then, if I were to ask about the Book of Mormon specifically, is it an ancient record of Native Americans? Same thing?
What do you think I would say?
Okay.
What?
I think it sounds like I wasn't hearing enough.
Just
to know.
Tell me.
I think you'd say no.
Okay, got your answer. No, no.
Okay.
Well, where's the data? Where's the story? Where is the evidence? I believe that progressive leaders in the church, they say that Joseph Smith, they do say he translated the plates by the gift and power of God. And so I think what will happen in the future is they'll say that this story was created by the gift and power of God. And eventually, way out into the future, they'll say it was a great religious, spiritual story that Joseph created. I think you've got to give Joseph some credit. I mean, this guy is powerful. And so they're not going to deny Joseph Smith, but they will explain Joseph Smith. And I think they'll explain him in a way that is authentic.
Right. But for you, the Book of Mormon isn't a historical record.
Nope.
Okay. Well, that definitely makes you not a shill for the church, at least spiritually or doctrinally or theologically, just for those who are wanting to make that accusation. And that's how I perceived you as well. What I haven't heard from you is, okay, one question I have is, at what point did you arrive at these positions, and how did you square that with, your time in CES or your time as a mission president? Are these more recent conclusions you've drawn, let's say in the past 5 or 10 years? Or when you were a mission president and when you were in CES, did you not believe in an anthropomorphic God, in literal atonement or resurrection. In the Book of Mormon, it's historical. And you either weren't telling the truth to the people under your stewardship, or you just were trying to not go there and not emphasize it. At what point in your journey, did you realize, or, that you didn't believe these things?
I believe that God lived and was out there and guiding the affairs of man up until about 10 years ago. And then I believed that, I concluded, I believe that we have created great stories about God. To me, that doesn't minimize the issue. The people don't create things that they don't need, and people need God. And so how Joseph Smith described God was different than how Paul described God, and how the scribes who purported to write the Gospels described God. And so they were anxiously engaged in describing God. And why do they do that? Because they need God. And so I'm a big believer that we create things we need, and those things that are important to us stick around because they help us. And in my life, whether I believe God was actually guiding the affairs of mankind or that we created God, I've always seemed to be very happy with the notion of God. Yeah, I'm happy with the idea of God.
But it wasn't until the past 10 years where you really started reaching some of these conclusions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yes.
And was that, for many people, that's this huge dark night of the soul crisis of faith, where it's like, my whole identity, my whole worldview, all this time I spent was based on a real belief that this was true, not just good, not just practical, but true. And now all of a sudden I'm concluding that it's not true. And then it's kind of catastrophic, and they go through years of really deep, intense soul searching and doubt and struggle and crisis and trauma. I'm not getting a sense that you had that experience.
No.
When you decided everything wasn't true.
No, I believe it is true. But I believe we created it. I believe things we create are true. Don't you?
They're true to us, but they're not literally true. They're practically useful. There's a difference between useful and true.
There's a difference between useful and true. I believe that people create stories and narratives because they need something. I believe we need God.
Yeah.
We create stories. Now, do I believe he sits there on a throne? No. Yeah. Now, I could be wrong, you know.
Sure.
But that's the conclusion I've made. And for me, it was an enlightenment. I felt better. The pieces of the puzzle came together. I was more authentic. Now, does that make me uncomfortable at times if I feel like a missionary who has been under my charge is bothered by what I say? Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that, but they still know that I believe in God, but I believe we created God. I still believe that Joseph was the greatest religious leader that maybe has ever lived, but I believe he created the ideas that we have about God. I'm at peace with that. But I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to go to war with people on it. I could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. But let people with better ideas come up and challenge me.
What has kept you from a conclusion that some draw, which is Joseph hurt people, he was a fraud, the church isn't true, the church is deceiving people. Some even go as far as to say the church is a cult, and now I'm going to do everything I can to take people out of the church and to bring the church down. It sounds like you're not in that place, either with Joseph or the church or Brigham. Is that true? You're not in that place, and if so, how have you avoided those sorts of conclusions about Joseph and the church, and thus desire to take it all down?
Well, I don't want to take the church down, because I'm a lot of things. Ungrateful doesn't happen to be one of them. Look at, of all the people I know who has received all kinds of great benefits and blessings from the church, who's received more than I have? Not many. I went into the church education system. It's a cool place to be as a teacher, especially when you're teaching Institute of Religion. I loved it. I had just a glorious experience in having meaning in my life attending that institute class. I loved sitting down with my institute director and asking every single question I could come up with, and he took the time and he answered the questions. So I was hired by CES. I didn't make a great living, but my wife is a good manager, and we were close as a family. And my wife was really big on teaching just Christian principles from the Book of Mormon and from the New Testament, and the church was a good environment raising our children. Then it was through contacts in the church I was able to leave CES and have the most thrilling, personal, professional experience of my life that has made me. All those things have come about as a result of my connection with the church. Now, the church has been good to me, and so I love the church. Now, do I have issues where I disagree? Yes. Do I have issues where it's come to the point where I really disagree? Yes. All of those are on social issues. And why is that? Because at heart, I'm liberal. And so I believe in progressive legislation. I believe in the strength of civil liberties and civil rights, and I believe in a liberal interpretation of that. I'm glad that the federal government has both passed legal decisions from the Supreme Court and congressional acts that have allowed us to get out of the great tragedy, which is American history, and that was 200 years of slavery, ending in the Civil War, the loss of 600,000 lives. We threw that off, and I'm a firm believer that we have to continue passing more legislation. It's still going to take a long, long time before African Americans feel incorporated into the American experience. All that stuff, women's, the equality of women. I believe that until women have absolute, complete control over their bodies, there is not complete equality. So that's why. So I've always been that way, and now I seem to be at odds with my religion on that. Especially on the issue of homosexuality, the loneliness and alienation that that gays will feel and continue to feel. that bothers me. I will do everything in my power to make sure that we heal from that and we modernize from that. So that's where I stand on the social issue. I'm a social liberal.
Where does that leave you in terms of your actual relationship with the church, in terms of participation, activity,
Yeah. In explaining this to my family and my friends, I've tried different ways of explaining this. Like, I've got to take a time out here. The best one I can come up right now is I'm taking a sabbatical. Now, am I going to kiss the church off the rest of my life? I don't know, but I'm taking a sabbatical. I need to work out my relationship with the church as it relates to how we treat gays and how we handle the whole issue of gay marriage and children from gay parents. And so I would be a disruptive force. I started becoming a disruptive force in priesthood meetings, and so I felt good in saying time out. I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm working through these things, and it just so happened that coincided with the end of my term in Deseret Trust Company. Does that negate the beautiful experiences I've had in the church? No. Did I love being a mission president? Yes. Did I believe God was out there directing the affairs of man? Yes. I've always believed that Joseph was a big man on campus. Now, do I believe that he did wrong things? Yes. Do I believe he'll have to pay for those? Yes. And he is paying for them. Look, we still can't get beyond this polygamy issue. It is purported that Joseph Smith said that the death of the church would be this polygamy issue. Well, if he said it, it certainly continues to nag at us. What do we really believe? Now, let me stop there because I could take different trains of thought, but that's the best I have right now.
And I've come to believe that some of the most central or essential currency within the church is, number one, authority, and number two, kind of obedience to authority and loyalty. And so some might ask, man, okay, great, Roger, you're super grateful to the church for all it's done, all the way that it's helped you. You have interacted and engaged at some of the highest levels, certainly higher than anyone we've ever had on Mormon Stories. I mean, Hans Matson was an area authority, but he was over Europe, and he may have met an apostle a time or two, but he certainly wasn't over 18 years on the board of directors of a real central part of the church's business operations. He wasn't necessarily called to that position by Gordon B. Hinckley himself. Like, someone might say to you, Roger, if you're so grateful, and if you've been allowed to be in the inner circle, and if loyalty is of the utmost currency, why in the world are you speaking out on Mormon Stories of all places? That's not loyal. That's not healthy for the church. That's probably very disloyal, probably makes people really uncomfortable. And it's certainly not a way to show your gratitude for all the wonderful things the church has done for you. What if, how would you respond to that sort of question?
Or maybe it has.
It is what?
Maybe it is a contribution to the church. Maybe I am helping. I believe in the dialogue, and coming on Mormon Stories, it took me 2 or 3 years to make up my mind that I would want to do that. In fact, I had come to the conclusion I never wanted to do it, but also, I have this desire to enter into the dialogue and the debate. And so if that's disloyal, so be it. I believe that we have all been taken by surprise by this marvelous thing called the internet and the digital revolution. And I believe that the 12 in that leaked bubble presentation, I think they got it right. I think on the left, they have John DeLynn speaking a truth that we had not thought of and having the courage to do it. I believe that the Denver Snuffer and the Snufferites movement is talking to the right, the very, very most conservative people who want to get back to the original experiences that they think Joseph Smith created. And then I think the church is in the middle, and I think that it's forcing the church leadership to examine their very most core beliefs, what they represent. And so I think we're in the dialogue, and I respect that. Getting back to my gratitude to George Hagel, it's all about all of us participating with our ideas. And do I believe the church will survive? Yeah, I do. I think in my other discussions, I told you what I think the church will look like in the future.
And that was basically more of a niche organization targeting a very specific subset of people versus a global church trying to target the whole world.
I believe that the church leadership has said, and they've shown through their actions, that we want people to prepare and go to the temple, to wear the temple garment, to pay their tithing, to participate at the ward and stake level in callings, and they believe that core will become larger and stronger. Now, do I believe it'll become 60, 70 million strong like the Rodney Stark said? No, I don't. And that's proven to be the case. And there are demographers that say there's a top end to this growth. Do I believe that the church will continue to send out missionaries to preach the gospel to the world? Yes. Do I believe that a lot of them will not make it to the point of going in the temple, paying the tithing, and becoming a part of that? Right. Why do I believe that? Because that's what the data shows. And so I think the church will continue to be strong with that core. Now, going a step further, its challenge will be that it will become a niche category, maybe even a niche product. Why do I believe that? Because I no longer believe that the general population in Europe and in America, we all grow up with the foundations of the fundamentals of Christianity. And so with the generations coming up that don't have the background in Christian teachings and obvious Christian teachings that are even taught in the schools, the church will have to be very specific in drawing attention to people who will become interested. And there will be a lot of competition, both from other religions and businesses who have to sell products. They'll make their niche products look as attractive as they possibly can. And so be it. Do I believe that's good? Yeah, I do. I believe people have got to compete and sharpen. They have to go back and focus on their ideas. What's the most important thing, and get rid of the stuff that is tangential or peripheral to what they really are. So that's what I believe.
Going back to that bubble chart for a second, there was me in Mormon Stories. There was ordained women that was listed. There was the snuffers on the right. There's pornography on there. There's, I got a sense they used some coded language to refer to kind of liberal, progressive, or even multicultural influences. This, I would love for you to see if you could help us get a bit of an insight or a window into kind of the brethren and what they think and how they're processing things. So let me ask a couple specific questions about that. I remember a lunch we had where I asked you probably the most common question I get asked. If I had to sort of tell you the one question that I get asked the most, it's given the broad awareness of the problems with the church history, the social problems, the stuff that you knew in the 70s, that the brethren, shut down the Leonard Arrington administration over because they realized the cat was getting out of the bag, that the can of worms was opening, and we were going to infect all these members with the truth about our history. So we've got to shut it down and punish anyone who talks about it. From that history emerges this question. You can't really know all that stuff and still believe. And so the most common question I get is, do the First Presidency of the Quorum of the 12, do they all still really believe that it's all literally true? And can you conceive of at least some of them who really at some point became kind of like you did, where they're philosophical, they see the church as practically true, but in their heart they know that they're not, that the church isn't really what it claims to be. Can you talk to that, your opinion about whether there are some apostles or even First Presidency members who actually don't believe?
Well, I believe, first of all, I think they would laugh if they heard that Roger Hendrix was opining on what they personally believed. And I'm not so sure they wouldn't be right. But here's my personal feeling about human behavior. No two people occupy the same position on all issues all of the time. And why do I believe that? Because we have so many opinions. And the members of the Quorum of the 12, just like the members of the Curia and the Catholic Church, they have opinions. And so from that, they try to get as close to the truth as they possibly can. And yes, these men better believe it. Now, will they continue to refine their beliefs? I think so. I mean, look at the essays that have come out. Certainly, look at the essays that have come out. They basically said there has never been a doctrine other than Brigham Young's private preference that the blacks not receive the priesthood. Now, when you look at President Kimball's account of what happened in the temple, there were still apostles who that was hard for them to come by that. But finally they had this incredible spiritual experience where they knew the prophet was speaking the truth. And now all the way from there to, This was just Brigham Young's personal opinion, and it got in the church, and we're now snuffing it out, and it never did have any substance or doctrinal basis. Now, somebody's changed somewhere, and I've got to imagine it's the leadership of the church that has changed on that. And they get information, and they pray about it, and they discuss it, and they move along. And in that regard, they're like most of us. I tell people who ask me, if they ask me, well, what do you think the brethren are thinking in the Quorum of the 12? I say, well, get around a ward council and listen to what people say around the ward council. And that's probably what they're saying at the highest levels. Why? Because people say the same things. And so when issues come up before them, they will express their opinions. And I've got to imagine they express their opinions like that or similarly at every level of the church. Does it bother me? No. Why? Because to a certain extent, the church is an organization. It operates on human qualities and organizational qualities, and I have no problem with that. As a matter of fact, I never have.
So within that framework, which makes a lot of sense to me, does that mean you can envision somebody who's actually in the 12 apostles or in the first presidency? Can you envision it within the realm of possibility or even probability that some of them don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical and may even don't believe this is, quote, the one true church? Is that within the realm of probability for you?
Well, I don't know about that. I know B.H. Roberts didn't think the Book of Mormon was historical, and the first presidency gave Joseph Fielding Smith and B.H. Robert plenty of opportunity publicly to debate that issue, and they went along with what Joseph Fielding said. That doesn't mean they can't pull out of the drawer and go along with what B.H. Roberts says, and in the future that might happen. But right now, I think these 15 men are very comfortable with what they believe. And I think that there has been an evolution, namely on the black issue. I'm happy with the revelation President Kimball had. I'm happy that the brethren were convinced spiritually, they said, to go to understand that President Kimball was speaking the truth. I'm glad they let blacks have the priesthood. I'm glad they have the essay that says it should never have been an issue. I'm glad about that. Now, I've got to assume that on these social issues, I have my own ego. I have confidence in my thought processes. Do I believe that we will become, in the future, more and more progressive about gay marriages, children of gay couples, how we handle homosexuality? Yeah, I've got to believe that that's going to be the case. And especially in Mormon families, if we continue to have bigger families than the norm, and we know that statistically gay children are born at a certain rate, that means probably in Mormon families we'll have a lot of gay kids. And so I think parents are not going to abandon their children. And that kind of strikes at one of the cores that has allowed me to take a stronger stand personally on homosexuality.
Again, touching back on that bubble chart, some of the more fascinating conversations I've had are around how, you think the brethren may have processed what was going on in the 2005s to 2015s, that kind of decade that was so influential, I think, in shaping the modern church. And I remember saying to you, I'm just some guy. These are all really brilliant men, and they're really sophisticated. And then I also think about what you just said maybe 30 minutes ago, which is that, you see this as a Hegelian dialectic that we're all engaged in. And you like that bubble chart because it shows the different players in the conversation at a higher level. And you think it's healthy that this church is experiencing this dialogue. I would wonder if you would think that the brethren perceive this dialogue as being healthy and good for the church. Are they glad Denver Snuffers out there shaking it up? Are they grateful Mormon Stories is there? Are they loving ordained women? I think we all would say no. They see it as these things as potentially existential threats to the church, and they're annoyed and they want to kill all these things and stamp them out and make them all go away. What do you imagine their thought process is when they look at ordained women swelling, when they look at Mormon Stories listenership and influence growing, when they hear about CES letter? Are they, as you, enjoying the dialectic? Take us to what you think their thought process is on all that.
Okay.
And how they respond and whether you think it's wise or not,
First of all, you don't always enjoy the dialectic. The dialectic will always make you feel uncomfortable because every position you take results in yet another position being taken. And so to me, honesty is giving that alternative position weight, understanding it up against your own position to see what new synthesis will be born from that. So I don't always enjoy the dialectic.
Not even this one?
I think I think God, there is a portion of your listenership that they want me to just be bitter about the church and throw it down. I'm not. I'm definitely not a neo-apologist.
We're talking about that next episode, by the way.
Excuse me?
No. I'm just saying. I'm foreshadowing. There's more good stuff to come.
And so, do I believe that the brethren like what John DeLynn is doing with Mormon Stories or Kate Kelly did with Ordained Women or Denver Snuffer? No, not at all. Why? I think they believe it's a heresy. But no company I've ever consulted for, no sports team I've ever been a part of, no organization that I've been a part of lauds or gives plaudits to the competition or to the alternative thoughts. And so that's the present disposition. I think they believe that Denver Snuffers a heresy. I believe, and I believe that John DeLynn makes them, well, they held a court on John DeLynn. What more can I say? They don't like it. With respect to John DeLynn, I say I've always felt that John DeLynn, at heart, loves the church. Loves it maybe as much as he loves anything in this life, and has been hurt by what he has found out, and is taking that hurt and those insights to the public, letting them weigh it. And what is it I admire about John, you, John? It is how you got the courage to do this. And I admire that. And I wouldn't be here in somewhat of a risk position for me if I didn't believe that, if I didn't have a lot of admiration for you in doing this. Let's see, what were your other questions?
Yeah, so to end this session, I'll end with this, and this is this is again kind of speculation. It's fun to do it, but let's just call it what it is. Let's just, you're a management consultant. Let's just say it's 2013. The Obama, the Romney stuff is done. The church is realizing that it's going to, the same-sex marriage stuff at the Supreme Court is really heating up. Ordained women is starting to really throb in the church's pain center. Mormon Stories is really getting its momentum. CES letter comes out. Denver Snuffer's starting to really get his movement, and his books are selling, and he's getting a following, and that's kind of what 2013 was. It was this culmination of these influences where post the Romney Mormon moment, the church realized it needed to deal with a few things that were starting to gain momentum. Let's say they called Roger Hendrix, management consultant, in and said, Roger, we've got these serious problems. We've got awareness of church history that's taken, European and North American members out of the church, very affluent, well-educated members out of the church at an unacceptably high rate. We've got Denver Snuffer on the right flank, taking members away, making them more fundamentalist in their theology, peeling them off, having their own baptisms, and expecting us to live too much in accordance with the Book of Mormon. That's really making us uncomfortable. And then we've got these crazy women out there protesting Temple Square in the middle of General Conference, disrupting things, demanding equal footing. Roger, we want to thrive as an institution. We've got our brand that we care about. We care about butts in seats, people who are faithful and loyal and committed, who will serve in their callings, and we need money to run this church. We need to keep our income solid because we've got all these assets we need to maintain and grow. Roger, help us respond to these threats. Save us, Obi-Wan. Well, can you speculate as to what your recommendations back then would have been, or did they do the right thing based on their best interests? And you can take each one separately if you want.
Yeah, really. There's a lot to unpack here. Let me just swing at a little bit. First of all, I think believer and non-believer and disaffected as well as a church loyalist, what we have to understand, all of us have to understand about the church is that it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 decide upon. For example, Joseph Smith is only important as interpreted by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. So those brethren, they don't have to buy everything about Joseph Smith, but what they do buy about Joseph Smith, that's important for the members to understand. And so the first thing is members have to understand that. People who are disaffected have to understand that that's the only thing that matters. And they will interpret that. That's why they're there. And so I would say that, pull in your ranks, understand that you have great power and great resources, and it's because you have a strong core of authority and leadership, and that there are people in this world who really dig that, love that, and that's really what they love, and you seem to be pretty successful at that. The next thing I would say would be make sure you minister to them, which they do. Make sure you give them everything they want. And what they want is they want the temple experience. They want the temple recommend. They want the priesthood garment. They want those very fundamental things. And that's what they're doing. And they'll continue to be strong that way. With respect to the competition, you just have to be very clear on who you are. And that's the best thing you do, and keep working that. What people outside of the church are affected from the church is to understand that the church has to look after its own interests. It has huge obligations from the programs it operates, and it will need members to pay tithing. I'm all for that. I have no problem with that. If you love it, and you believe them, and you understand what the First Presidency and the Quorum of 12 represent, and you like the positions they take, you're going to give money to that because that represents your interests as well. So I don't have any problem with that, nor do I have problems if you have disagreements. And I don't believe disagreements are bad. I don't believe people who disagree are bad. And do I believe that they help? Yes. But from that standpoint, they don't want Denver Snuffer to succeed, and they don't want anything on the left to succeed other than what they believe is right and true. And anybody who is in any corporation, we all have to fight for our survival, don't we? And the church and the leadership, they understand they have to grow the church, and they have to protect their members. And that's what those folks are doing. With respect to me, I have a disagreement on a social issue. I believe that's okay. I don't want to rip down the church. I'm not bitter at the church. I have a disagreement with on a social issue. What's wrong with that? And what's wrong with me taking that kind of position? Nothing. Do I want to kill the competition? No. I don't use words like kill and destroy. I believe sharpen your focus, know what you really want to do, and those guys do. And have I answered enough of those questions?
Yeah, let me just drill a little more. So they say ordain
women.
Drill
a little more.
They say ordain women, Roger. It's getting out of control. What do we do about ordained women? Do we excommunicate Kate Kelly, or is there some other path? What would your advice have been in 2013?
They've already told us they've excommunicated Kate Kelly.
But what would you have recommended? Would there have been a wiser approach from their best self-interest? Or did they do the most rational, wise thing based on their self-interest?
I think that of all the... I think that they probably need to clear those folks out. Not that you and I would disagree with those folks, but I think in the process of sharpening their own message, they also have to tell you what their message isn't. And so they don't think their message is Denver Snuffer. They don't believe their message is Kate Kelly. And I'll be honest with you, I would hope that they would just love John DeLynn and understand how much he loves the church. That card wasn't dealt that way. I feel bad about that, but I also believe you have flourished. So that's kind of how I'd answer that.
So in some sense, they did act in their best interest.
Yeah, in that instance, they are acting to make sure people know what they don't believe. And
with the history stuff, though, it's just people talking about the factual history that's making them uncomfortable. So it's not so much, I guess there's a difference between the Jeremy Runnels and, let's just say, me, because we're not like ordained women trying to define the church in a way it doesn't want to be defined necessarily, or with Denver Snuffer. We're just saying, hey, there's these problems with the history, come clean. That's different than the identities that maybe Kate Kelly or Denver Snuffer wanted to foster within the church, or is it not?
Well, I think that's a good question. Yeah, I think Denver Snuffer and Kate Kelly were trying to create something. I think the CES letter and John DeLynn were trying to say, come clean on this stuff. For the life of me, I've read that CES letter, and those questions been around. I'm surprised that got as such great traction that it did. But aren't, with the essays and the new books being written, aren't they coming clean on church history that maybe they didn't want to be shared with the members or the public? Or haven't they come clean on the polygamy, and haven't they come clean on the black and the priesthood? I mean, they're coming along. I can't see that they haven't. That's how I would answer that, John.
All right. We're closing in on our on another hour, and we do have one more episode to go. And we're going to be focusing on Roger's reactions and views around the new kind of neo-apologetic movement that's springing up with Bushman, with Terrell and Fiona Givens, with Patrick Mason, Spencer Fluman, and kind of that crowd. Greg Prince even. I know Roger has some strong feelings or thoughts around that. And we're going to be asking Roger a series of questions that many of you have written in. There have been questions about the second anointing. There have been questions about James Hamula, the first quorum of the 70, I think, presidency member who was recently excommunicated. And we have a lot more questions from you. So don't go away. Stay tuned. Come right back for our final, and it will be our final, segment with Roger Hendrix, who's been marvelous and delightful and intriguing and maddening and enlightening so far. So thanks, Roger, for another hour.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Come right back, mormonstories.org. Thanks, everybody.